Shalom, shalom, family. Welcome back. Welcome back. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm glad to be back, brother. I'm glad to be back. So, as we can tell by the title today, we're going to be getting into Jews of color within a modern world. All right. We're just going to bring out a few books, get into, Jews of color and the history behind these people within certain localities, certain locations. All right. Just something to put out for this week. All right. All right. Looking at the chat, getting everything ready. Y'all willing this weekend, we'll be back with some more information, trying to get something together for, the history of our people within the Roman localities, the Roman territories, and the history behind those events. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get into it. As always, if you have questions, comments, anything, please go ahead and put it in the comment section, and I'll try my best to answer your question. All right. So, make this full screen. All right, so let's get into it. So let's see. So the first book we're going to be digging into today is Diversity, Effect and Embodiment in Organizing. And we're just going to start off by establishing, a few facts about, Jews of color. And one is dealing with the Sephardic and Yemenite communities. So it says, Israeli Jewish whiteness has become a major signifier of higher social status, not only vis a vis Palestinians and Arabs. It is all the more important, vice versa. That's probably what they're saying. Various Israeli Jewish ethnicities, such as Sephardic or quote unquote Hispanic, and that's not meaning modern day Hispanics, or Sephardic Jews and the Yemenite communities conceived of as Black Jews. All right, so these communities are conceived of as Black Jews, supposedly on a basis of their somewhat dark phenotype or darker phenotype. It says Black Jews have been the victim of persistent intra-Jewish racism. All right, and that's what we're going to see is a recurring theme. Once we get into these books and stuff, we're going to see that this is a recurring thing, that the Black Jews are persecuted or just being racist towards by the other people within the Jewish communities, but which has historical origins in Israeli society even before the establishment of Israel. All right, so Black Jews have been a victim of persistent intra-Jewish racism, which has historic origins in Israeli society even before the establishment of Israel. So this was happening even before the establishment of Israel. It goes on to say the European Zionist movement, comprising mainly of Ashkenazi Jews, was a precursor to the formation of the modern state of Israel. Consequently, Ashkenazi Jews had established their status as official representatives for the Jewish race. This marginalization or marginalized the existing Sephardic and Yemenite communities that already settled within Palestine. The tense interrelations between white and non-Jews have prevailed over the years and are still manifested in contemporary Israeli society. Over the years following several absorbed waves of immigrant Jews, Israeli societies have expanded to fill more groups conceived of as Black Jews, such as Ethiopian Jews. And it says the tense and interrelations are also evident in the Israeli labor markets, where vulnerable Black ethnicities are systematically marginalized. All right. So let's just get into a depiction of a few Yemenite Jews. And it says Jufes de la Region de Rada, or Jews in the region of Rada, Yemen, 1909. And shalom, shalom to the brothers in the chat. And of course, here's some more recent pictures of Jews from Yemen. All right. This is Jews from Yemen that ended up migrating into Tanzania, forming a community with other Moroccan Jews. All right. And we see what they look like. They're Jews of color. All right. But let's continue on. And we're going to go to the Mentins of Portugal, 1691 through 1708. And it's just going to get a quick source from this real quick, just to build up before we get to the western side of the world. It says, however, many new Christians from the south were settled in central Portugal after the expulsion of the Moors, and Lisbon, in its great colonial days, drew its fresh, exotic elements from Africa and the East. William Bromley, who visited Lisbon in 1693, said that in spite of the persecution of the Jews and new Christians, these people still formed a third of the population, and many of them looked as swarthy as the Moors. All right. And we know swarthy is predicated or, usually attributed to Africans or darker colored people. Even in the book Black Jews of Africa by Tudor Parfit, he mentions that the Jews were swarthy as Africans. So we know what that word swarthy means. It goes on to say, this was probably more noticeable in Lisbon than elsewhere, but a Moorish flavor had filtered back into the upper classes and even into the royal family in spite of their Burgundian origin, all right? So we see that even in 1693, after the expulsion of the Jews, there were still Jews within Lisbon, and they were swarthy as Moors, all right? They were Jews of color. It goes on to let us know that the expulsion of the Jews and new Christians had deprived Portugal of their commercial class or their commercial class, all right, because they was the wealth class. They basically drove their economic or economy like we do. It goes on to say as well at the bottom, although the Portuguese Jews had been expelled, they still had influence, for they settled in European ports, particularly in Amsterdam and in the West Indies. So when we go and visit Amsterdam and the West Indies within this video, we should, see this same, color reflected. We should see Jews of color within these locations. All right, so next we're going to jump to when Scottish was Jewish, or when Scotland was Jewish. All right. And we're going to read from the very top. It says 7 famous Scotsmen are pictured here. Presbyterian farmer John Knox, scholar John Buchanan, Marquis of Argyll, Archibald Campbell, the Earl of Arkram. I'm going to skip these names, of course. But it goes on to say, as curiosity inspection will affirm, none of these prominent Scotsmen look typically Scottish. In fact, they appear rather dark and Semitic. Yet here they are, Scottish aristocrats. The Scottish royal stewards were equally dark and Semitic, it says. Excuse me 1 second, family. All right, my phone was ringing. All right, sorry. But it says the Scottish royal stewards were equally dark and Semitic in appearance, all right? Of Charles II's dark appearance, his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, had been half mortified, writing about her confinement, that the child was so dark that she was ashamed of him, all right? And he was quickly dubbed the Black Boy. And it says enemies made out that he was a black bastard begotten by a black Scotsman, all right? So it goes on to say that we propose that many, perhaps most, present-day Scots are descended from the same types as ancestors who produced these personages. It says further, we suggest that the forebears were Mediterranean Jews from France, Spain, and Portugal. All right. And that would include the royal Scots stewards, who was or Charles II, rather, right here. And I'm gonna show a picture on the next slide of him. But this right here depicted is John Knox. And it says this wood carving of Presbyterian reformer John Knox depict him as having a full beard, covered head, Semitic facial features. We will propose that Knox was the grandson or the son of a Sephardic Jewish immigrant to Scotland. All right. And we can see that he's definitely a man of color. All right. Now, when dealing with Charles II, this is what his appearance is right here. This is Charles II and his, I guess you can say Scottish wife or European wife. And we can see he actually looks pretty similar to John Knox. They have, similar noses, similar facial features. and they both were described as, dark and Semitic in appearance. All right, dark and Semitic in appearance. So now we're gonna jump over to Brazil. We're dealing with the source Afro-Brazilian, Jewish women, female centrist, transgression, the borderlands. All right, and we're gonna start at the second paragraph, and it says, in the Salvador Jewish community, the Comunidade Israelite de Salvador, or the CIS, which was a conservative synagogue, I formerly interviewed two Afro-Brazilian men, two Afro-Brazilian women, and a woman who's identified as Marina or Marina. It says I place Marina in quotes because the people who self-identify or who are assigned as or to this color category distinguish themselves or are distinguished from Negroes. The more political consensus term meaning black as used in the US context. This is problematic because many Merinos are descended from black African peoples, and this very well could be a derivative of Morano, all right, or Moreno, what the Jews were called. That's why she's calling herself a Moreno, but it goes on to say, so Merinos could be included in the term Afro-Brazilian, but are often seen as a separate group. Yet here in the US, they would possibly be considered part of the same group, which would be Afro-Americans. But it goes on to say one of the Afro-Brazilian men, Clarison, was in his early 30s and was born Jewish because his mother is a Jew of African descent. I was introduced to Clarison by Leah, the first member of the CIS I met, and the secretary of the board of detectives of the synagogue. She facilitated my interest into the community and introduced me to many people. The other Afro-Brazilian man I interviewed with Thomas, I met at the luncheon following the first Saturday morning service I attended at the CIS. He was in his early 30s and converted to Judaism after he discovered he had Jewish ancestors who were forced to convert to Catholicism during the Brazilian Inquisition. And this is an Afro-Brazilian, all right? And this is a man of color who came to the realization or discovered that he had ancestors or Jewish ancestors who were converted to Catholicism during the Inquisitions within Brazil. All right. So continuing on, it's the Jew white, the racial place of the Southern Jew. All right. Starting at the sentence prior to the highlighted section. It says the liberal Bavarian writer John Piesel in the 1780s compared the Polish Jew to orangutan. All right. Their necks exposed the color of their black, their necks exposed the color of black. All right. So within 1780, these Polish Jews were described as, orangutans. And he says that their necks exposed the color of black. So these Jews within Poland would have so-called been black or people of color. It goes on to say Adam Goronsky, a Polish nobleman, visited America in 1850, took every light-colored mulatto for a Jew. All right, and that's even significant because we know within Jonathan Swartz's book, Jews and blacks in the early modern world, he says that the Jews, or a lot of the Jews, were very, as a matter of fact, let me just pull up that quote real quick. Let me pull up that quote real quick so I don't misquote it. Let me stop sharing my screen while I find that, because I do not want to misquote the source. One second, family. If I can't find it, I'm going to just go back to it at the end of the video. All right, here we go. So when he just said that he took every light-skinned mulatto for a Jew in America, this can reflect why, or be another reason why right here, because as it says, though a mulatto of the fourth degree descent may, no, that's not it. It's actually right here. It says, note that the lack of stability in Jews of color and overlapping a cultural and physiological otherness. Many of the Jews were mulattoes of the fourth degree. That is very light-skinned blacks. So they weren't actually mulattoes, they were just very light-skinned blacks. So that can be very well what this man that visited America in the 1850s were, attesting to. But let me continue because we have a lot to go over. We have a lot to get through. All right. But he says he took every light color mulatto for a Jew. All right. John Quincy Adams disdained Florida Senator David Levi Ewell for the dash of an African blood in him, and Confederate statesman Judah Benjamin, or Judah P. Benjamin, olive skinned and black hair, was immortalized as the Dark Prince. All right. And even we know that Judah P. Benjamin did have so-called black or African or Negro blood in him because his father was a small, dark-skinned Spanish Jew. All right. And this is actually Judah P. Benjamin. It's funny because his father actually married a white woman. Where does it say that at? It goes on to say, yes, it says he has always retained his respect for his race, although he married a Gentile, and he was never identified with the Jewish church. All right. And that's dealing with his father. So we see what he ended up looking like. And that's why the source prior just said that he was dubbed or immortalized as the Dark Prince because he had so-called African blood in him. And that was actually from his black Sephardic father. Continuing on, same source. Southern anti-Semites employed racial imagery that invoked the Jew as a perverted dark other. In 1898, a Virginian, a Jewish convert to Christianity, all right, a Jewish convert to Christianity, charged with wife beating, was described as swarthy, of complexion, and of Jewish extraction. So even in 1898, we had Jews of color living in Virginia, and this one in particular was charged with beating his wife, and he was described as swarthy and of Jewish extraction. All right. And no, we do not condone wife beating. Continuing. So now we're about to take it down to the Caribbeans and the West Indies and stuff real quick, specifically Suriname real quick. And we're about to read from Jewish Autonomy in a Slave Society. All right. And we're going to start at the highlighted. It says that Portuguese Jews in both metropolitan and colonial communities had made similar threats during the 18th century when they found their leaders unsatisfactory. For Menza in particular, conversion to the state religion would not have been unfamiliar turf, given that his half-brother, Garrett, captain of Suriname colored militia, was a Christian. That the Euro-African Jews could make such threats at all shows that by the 1790s, their social and biological ties intersected with a wide swath of the colonial population. And if you've watched my prior videos, we know that the Euro-African Jews, that's basically what they call the Black Sephardic Jews over here in the Americas, specifically the West Indies or the Caribbeans, rather. It says the composition of the society membership shows how complex a group Euro-African Jews in Suriname had become. The Mahad correctly suspected that among the brothers were Ashkenazi slaves and mulattoes. All right, so it's also possible that these Euro-African Jews or Black Sephardic Jews had Ashkenazi slaves as well as mulattoes. It says whose presence could complicate the regency's administration of the Jasiba, since these individuals did not fall under the jurisdiction of the Portuguese Mahad or Muhammad. It says, moreover, many of the Portuguese Jewish members were still legally enslaved, all right, and that would encompass these Euro-Africans. It says, a key point overlooked in previous scholarship. One of the society's principal leaders, Isaac Gabe, was the master of his own brother, Jacob Nahar, and both of these brothers was black, whom he had purchased in order to eventually free him. All right, so he purchased his own brother to eventually free him. It says from time to time, Jacob submitted allowances to his brother as reimbursements for manumission costs. By August 1792, payment was complete, and Isaac was ready to liberate his brother and serve as his grantor sponsor. All right. It says a position the colonial government had created to prevent former slaves from becoming public charges. Goes on to say the Euro-African Jewish community does straddle the boundaries between white and black, Portuguese and Ashkenazi, enslaved and free. During the first years of the Dar Jarasim or the Dar Jesarm's formal existence, and we're going to deal with this a little later. This is basically like a synagogue that these Euro-African Jews had, but it says the leadership of the Brotherhood was confrontational and demanding. Only three members, Isaac, Reuben, and Ishmael, had dared to sign the Brotherhood's proposal bylaw, a passive-aggressive act that allowed the Regents to outlaw the Jesiba on the grounds that the Brotherhood had to have more than three members in order to be viable. And the Jesiba is when basically, I guess you're trying to establish yourself as a full congregation or synagogue. And that's what they was trying to do, because at first it was just like a brotherhood, as they mentioned. But it goes on to say, by early 1793, the regents initiated legal prosecution against the Euro-Africans for claiming themselves to be congregants when they were merely mulattoes, for defaulting on their communal taxes, and for holding a clandestine prayer quorum. Although this prosecution was a direct attack against the Euro-African Jews, it was just as much as an aggressive attempt to enforce their inclusive within the Portuguese Jewish community. Previous scholars who claimed that the Mahad's main goal was to dismantle Dar Jesharam are far from the mark. Later that year, the Euro-Africans again attempted to bypass the regents by presenting a long petition to the governor to pray in their own societies. Moses Rodriguez, the exiled Euro-African Jew who staged a violent attack in Jonesavane in 1778, was among the 31 signatories. All right. So that's what was going on during this time in the late 1700s. Within Suriname, you had Euro-African Jews basically struggling against racism and even struggling to try to get their congregation, or trying to get their, I guess you can say, brotherhood turned into a congregation and a synagogue. As it said right here, they were literally persecuted for claiming that they were congregants, all right, of their own, stuff. But let's jump over to this book, Once We Were Slaves, continuing on to get information on these Euro-African Jews. And we're going to read from the very top again. It says, yet if Sarah and Isaac heard about predecessors in the Jewish community, so too did they learn something about rebellion. David de Vere's deathbed protests were a faint echo compared to the highly vocal outrage Suriname's multiracial Jewish community expressed over their mistreatment. All right, and the Jewish community within Suriname was multiracial, because you had black Jews and you also had white Jews. But it says, this outrage had come to a head in 1793 when Joseph Cohen Nasi, one of the leaders of Dar Jaram or Dar Jesarim, passed away. All right. And if you're familiar with Joseph Cohen Nasi, he was one of the black Sephardic Jews that, ended up in the concentration camps or ended up in confinement during the Holocaust. All right. But it goes on to say, Dar Sharam, literally path of the righteous. All right, so that's what that means. The path of the righteous was a fraternity or a seva that had been set up in 1759 to provide colored Jews a place where they could worship without being constantly reminded that they were considered inferior. It also allowed them to be fully Jews. All right, so this was the main purpose of starting this fraternity or quote unquote brotherhood, path of the righteous. It says the colored Jews were denied basic religious rights in regular synagogues. For example, Jews of color could not say prayers for the dead, nor could white Jews say them on their behalf. So the colored Jews built their own synagogue on Savaplain, where they could worship in peace. All right. At Dar Jasharim, men of color could be Yahudim, all right, free to educate their young and themselves in the ways of the Torah, all right, because when they was trying to go to the other congregations, they could not do this. So they had to establish their own congregation or synagogue. It says, yet despite having their own Siva, the members of Dar Jesharim had no cemetery. Thus, when Joseph Cohen Nasi died, his family found themselves once again at the mercy of the white Muhammad. It says, although a leader of Dar Jesharim, Nasi was allotted only a shallow grave in the cemetery swampiest section. All right, so this is how they did Joseph Nasi, man. This is how they did Joseph Nasi. They buried this man within the cemetery in the swampian section, all right? It says, when Dar Jesharim requested a more fitting place to bury Nasi, they were bluntly told by the Mahad, you people have got no say here. And if you don't shut up, we will make you shut up. You people, as if they were not also Jews, all right? So this is what was going on down there. It goes on to say, even the Christian presence were taken aback by Dar Jesharim were being treated. The whole thing was humiliating. In the end, Nasi was buried in the swampiest section, but the leaders of Dar Jesharim filed a 20-page complaint. On the proximity, 34 signers, 6 were women. One was Jacob's wife. Another was Samia, relative of Isaac Nasi. Like Jacob Nasi's wife, she could not sign her name except with an X. However, this did not keep her from raising her voice in protest. All right. So when Sarah and Isaac arrived in Suriname, Sima Nasi was still alive to tell the whole story. She was also old enough to remember the early glory days of the Portuguese congregate Tzedek ve Shalom before the erroneous relegations of the 1750s had denigrated people who had too many ancestors who were not solely Nakoa or Nakoa. She was also strong enough to have fought back against the discriminations waged against the colored Jews. Sima Nasi was a matriarch of Dar Jesharim. Born around 1737, Sima Nasi was listed as age in the 1811 census. She would die only a few months after the census was taken and before the siblings received permission to immerse themselves in ritual bath. Sima Nasi was one of the people who had rather ingeniously argued that the Jewish community racist practices were actually contrary to the Suriname secular law. All right. So this was what this sister was pointing out. All right. So she's doing some good work down there, fighting for the Jews of color in the 1700s. It says Sima Nasi was not the only member of her family to make the argument. Nasi lived with her son Jacob Nahar, who was also signed in 1793. Who also signed the 1793 complaint. Like many of the key signers, they had money and education on their side. Nahar was a clear maker, a tailor with 2 tailor apprentices, suggesting that Nahar had his own shop. The color line that oppressed Nahar and his mother also helped them up above other people with African ancestry. All right, so these were Black Jews. It says there was a division, for example, between Nahar and his enslaved assistant. Nahar was colored, his servant Black. All right, so even his servants were Black. It says the servants were not the only Black servants around the household. Nahar also had a Black house shooter, which is a housekeeper named Jeanette, with whom he had 3 young children named Isaac, Doris, and Wilhelmina. All right, so this can even be something we see sometimes when we see sources talking about you had Portuguese Jews enslaving or having African slaves and mixing with African women. All right. In this scenario, we see that there was a Black Jew with Black house servants and Black slaves, or Black housekeepers, who he literally had 3 children with. These wouldn't be mulattoes. These will be black people. These will be Jews, descendants of Nahar, who's a Sephardic Jew. But it goes on to say, House Shuster or House, yes, House Shudder was a local emphasis for a concubine, and Jeunet appears to have once belonged to Nahar, even though she and her children were free at a time on the census. Neither Jeunet nor Simonasi had to do the housework alone. An enslaved housemaid named Amoeba lived with them. All right. In 1793, colored Jews like Nasi and Nahar used the education that Nako prized so highly against the white Jews. He goes on to say, unlike his mother, who was one of the last to sign, Nahar's name was fourth from the top, right after E. It says, Emenses, Jacob Jerusalem, and Reuben, although Simonasi could not write her name, her son signed his own elegantly on the petition and later on the census form. The complaint demonstrated that some SIVA members could read and write, and they understood colonial and Jewish law well enough to challenge the colonial's racial heresies by appealing to its own rules. All right. It goes on to say the elevated prose undermined or undermined the idea that the coloring line or the coloring were second class at anything. And I do not know what this word exactly is, so I don't want to butcher it. I'm just going to say coloring. All right, so it goes on to say the 1793 complaint echoed early agitations for rights by members of Dar Jeshurun in 1790. Reuben and Ismail had requested full communal rights. In response, the white Mahaj suggested that Dar Jeshurun leaders drop a proposal of how to expand Dar Jeshurun. But before I continue, this is actually pictures, or this right here is a black and white picture of Jewish shoe keepers within Paramaribo, within Suriname. And this is Pierre Jacques Bonnet. And once we go to the color, we can see that all these people here are people of color. These are the Jewish, the black Jewish owners of these stores, black Jewish owners of these stores. And these more than likely are, other slaves and stuff that was around during this time. Because slaves in the Caribbean were allowed to, buy things and stuff like that. But again, it goes on to say, let me start over. In response, the white Mahaj suggested that Dar Jeshurun leaders drop a proposal of how to expand Dar Jeshurun from a SIVA fraternity into a separate congregation. All right, so this is what they were striving to do, grow from a fraternity into a congregation or a synagogue. It says, in good faith, the leaders of Dar Jeshurun responded. They asked for a separate space with the same religious rights as other Nako, but with continued access to the Tzedek v. Shalom's Poor Relief Cemetery and Mikvah. Disappointment followed. It says Tzedek v. Shalom was fine with a separate place for colored Jews to worship, but had no intention of giving them privileges, even in that separate space of providing them full access to Tzedek v. Shalom's Poor Relief. The white Mahaj response to the 1793 complaint was even more brutal. The Mahaj ordered Dar Jeshurun to disband immediately. All right, so this is what they told them to do: to disband immediately. Anyone who continued to worship there or be involved in any way would be fined 75 gliders or guiders. Founding who continued their involvement would be fined 150 guiders. Either amount was huge sum of money, given that less than 100 guiders could buy a passage all the way to Amsterdam. So this was a lot of piece of change back then. All right, this was a lot of money that they would find if they would not leave, their SIVA, their fraternity, their congregation. It says even more devastating than that edict itself was the response of colonial authorities, who somewhat predictably sided with the Tzedek v. Shalom's Mahaj. All right, so again, this is your white congregation, and the Dar Shalom or Dar Jeshurun is the black congregation. It goes on to say, The response of the colonial authorities, who somewhat predictably sided with the Tzedek v. Shalom's Mahad and white privilege. By 1793, Dar Yesharim ceased to exist as a separate community. The Kolarim Judim, or maybe this is saying like colored Jews, were once again second-class members of the white-governed synagogues. All right, so they had to leave their own synagogue and go back to the white-owned or the white-governed synagogues. And this is a depiction of what that synagogue looked like. Within Suriname Paramaribo, or Paramaribo. All right. Your African Jewish prayer house, known as the Siva, Society or Brotherhood, Dar Yesharim, Path of Righteousness. The Eurafrican Jewish Brotherhood was officially disbanded in 1817. The site upon which it stood is still known as Sevilla Plain, Society Square, or Plaza. All right, so it still stands, but it's not a Eurafrican synagogue anymore. And shalom to the brother in the chat, Paul, watching from Africa, Namibia. Shalom. That's great. It goes on to say, hence when Sarah and Isaac Brandon arrived in Paramaribo or Paramaribo, they appealed not to Dar Yesharim but to Tzedek ve Shalom for their conversions. Many of their leaders of the old guard of Siva were still around. The treatment of the Jews of color had improved somewhat from the contentious 1790s. Joseph Nasi gravesite appears to have sunk into the swamp. All right, so Joseph Nasi's gravesite eventually ended up sinking even further down, deeper into the swamp. What it goes on to say, but others were buried on higher ground. It says when Sima Nasi died a little over 2 months after the census, at the age of 74, she was commemorated with an elegant stone in the Tzedek ve Shalom cemetery. Yet iniquities persisted in the city, even though white visitors described it as bucolic Eden. All right, so that's what was going on in 1700s, again, late 1700s, mid 1700s, with the Black Jewish community within Suriname. So let's continue on. Source to the left, the Jews, the color of Jews, racial politics, and radical diasporism. Starting at the highlighted. Says born on the island of Jamaica to an Afro-Jewish mother and an Afro-Asian father. He came to the United States when he was 9 years old to live with his mother on his siblings' side, with his mother's and his siblings in Bronx. His work with the Center for Afro-Jewish Studies involves developing research on Afro-Jewish communities worldwide on Jewish and African diasporic peoples. He is currently working on a book on philosophical and historical questions posed by the existence of Afro-Jews. So Lewis Gordon, he says that I had a unique relationship to the issue, being Jewish, Black, and from the island of Jamaica. In my childhood, the only people I knew who were Jews were either dark-skinned, brown, or beige. In other words, all people of color. Did you just hear what he just said, family? This man just said, literally, in his childhood, the only people he knew of that were Jews were people of color. They were either dark-skinned, brown, or beige. All right. So there was this whole world of Judaism I knew about, that I grew up in, that was in no way reflected by the presentation of Judaism in Judaic studies. I didn't go to graduate school in Judaic studies. It's the difference between being a scholar of Judaism and being a Jew. But researching African studies, especially on the African diaspora, invariably brings one in contact with African Judaism. As a scholar, I knew about African Judaism, but the problem is all the scholarly activity that dominated Judaic studies had already centered itself without recognizing its limitations. All right. Continuing. He says, I just came back from Brazil, where I began to not only see presence of Moroccan and Ethiopian Jewish communities there, but also some of the lay rituals. I've seen people on the streets who reflect West African Jewish community who may have come over through slavery. All right. Again, I've seen people on the street who reflect West African Jewish community who may have come over through slavery. This is the same brother who said he grew up not knowing nobody that was Jewish. This is the same brother who grew up saying or knowing Jews that were only people of color. All right. So again, I've seen people on the streets who reflect West African Jewish communities who may have come over during or through slavery, as we've been saying already. But no one is asking those questions, so the research hasn't developed yet. It's just me going through the streets, meeting people in the market. All right, let's see. So it says this will give some idea of the complexity in the way which I formulated the list of Jews right now. When I say Ashkenazi Jews for a long time, I and most people really just think of white Europeans, but an increased number of Ashkenazi women are marrying men of color. But the children are being raised in Ashkenazi Judaism. All right, I'm going to continue on to the next one because I do not want to get into Ashkenazi Judaism. But again, important factors to take from this. This man could see West African Jewish communities reflected within Brazil. And also growing up, he knew no other Jew but Jews of color. Continuing on, Yavila McCoy. She states, I went to a Hasidic elementary school, and in my elementary school was where I learned the word Schwartz. I was told that it was just the Yiddish term for black, all right? So didn't we just read sources earlier talking about how the Jews were Swartzy? The man that was charged with beating his wife was Swarty, all right? And she said that she was told that it's just a Yiddish word for the term black. So again, we know that Swartzy means black. We know that Swartz means black. But it says, but I knew it was a derogatory term because of the way they used it. I sometimes ask friends today who make the same argument to think of the last three contexts in which they hear the term Swartz used to determine whether any of these contexts were flattering. Early on, I noticed that my classmates feared the young men and women of color in our neighborhood because it was routine practice for a group of girls I was walking with to cross the other side of the street should they see a black person coming in our direction. I remember being angry on many occasions and even sometimes stubbornly walking forward along and rejoining my group at the next corner to prove that there was nothing to fear, but inside feeling like I was waging and losing battle against a myth that I could not change. All right. So this so-called Jew of color, Mrs. Yavila McCoy, growing up in school, she was called Swartz. All right. And goes on to say, more recently, people have suggested that with the growing number of people of color in American Jewish community, racial prejudice must be on the decline. My answer has been that awareness of the presence of Jews of color is growing, yet it continues to be a challenge. The small number of Jews of color living in various communities around the U.S. cannot, by presence alone, contradict the practice of exceptionalism in regards to the uprooting racialized thinking. In the face of long-headed prejudices, it is too easy to see and treat one or two Jews of color as exceptions to otherwise true negative rules regarding race and cultural stereotypes. And we must be willing to work on the stubble area of our thinking as well as in order to eliminate racism within our community. So again, I told you all it would be a recurring thing that we see racism, towards the Black Jews within these communities. It goes on to say they don't have to reckon within their treatment of people who are dark-skinned, who are not Jews. They just have to accept the new dark-skinned Jew, but not marry that Jew, but not touch that Jew. I had kids cry in my class. They would make us hold hands on trips, and kids would cry rather than touch my hand. They were afraid I would hurt them black, or excuse she says they were afraid I would turn them black. They were very, very harsh racism. All right. And that was what she dealt with growing up in a Jewish elementary school, or in a Jewish school, and in a Jewish community, being black and Jewish herself. Now let's deal with Rabbi Kapir Funnye. All right. So he says, I was drawn to Judaism as a spiritual quest, a lack of spiritual fulfillment I found in other faiths. I tried Islam for a while, but Judaism just seemed to fit my soul. Judaism is just not something folks are born into. Some, yes, but don't the Kabbalists tell us that each human being has a spark and those sparks go into the world? They cannot go into any soul. Many people feel that when some people come to Judaism, they were Jews already. They had Jewish soul, a calling to Judaism. Julius Lester said that many years after I converted to Judaism, became very much a practicing Jew, I started digging into my family's history. My mother's name before she was married was Rosella Cohen, all right? Her mother's name was Tamara Cohen, and her husband's name was Caesar Cohen. Is there a connection? I can't prove that definitively, but the name suggests it, all right? And it's more than likely a connection because we know from the videos I've done prior that there was a lot of Black Brazilians and a lot of Black Jamaicans with the surname Cohen that immigrated to the United States, all right? This is facts. But it says, from the Black Jewish perspective, Christianity was not the religion of choice of the greater majority of African Americans, all right? Christianity was not the choice for the greater majority of African Americans, particularly those whose ancestors had anything to do with the Middle Passage and the slave trade. Christianity was a faith system where the very people who were enslaving you were now giving you God. And so for Black Jews, that just seemed impossible. Or that just seemed impossible. It's like an impossibility. The connection with Africa is that many of the African people who were transported through the Middle Passage to the Western Hemisphere were of Hebraic stock from the Ashanti and the Igbo of West Africa, who have distinct connections with Judaism in their past. This is what Rabbi Kapir is saying. Kapir Funnye is saying, all right? What we've already been saying for years. The fact is that there is a connection with Africa. And that is that many of the African people who were transported throughout the Middle Passage to the Western Hemisphere were of Hebraic stock from the Ashanti as well as the Igbo. And not just the Ashanti and the Igbo, we have other tribes as well. The more we study, the more we learn of these connections. So our return is a return to the worship of our forefathers, not necessarily trying to emulate or imitate Ashkenazi Jewry. So when we're waking up and we're returning to Judaism, when we're returning to the ancestral religion of our forefathers, we're not imitating Ashkenazi Jewry. As he said, we're returning to the worship of our forefathers, our ancestral religion. He says, my wife and I went to Africa in 2002, and I was interested that everyone there could pronounce our name, Funnye. Everybody in Cameroon and in Nigeria said Funna. My wife looked at me and said, do you notice that they know how to say your name? So I asked the guide, and he said, this is a common name. It's Ofonye in Nigeria. I've been involved with the Jewish community since 1978, when my wife and I first enrolled our oldest daughter in a Jewish day school in the nursery program. As Jews, we were very opposed to having our children attend public schools because although public schools is not supposed to promote any religion, in fact, it does, particularly around Christmas, holiday, and Easter. In the Black Jewish community, there's vehement opposition to these holidays being foisted on our children. All right. Since many Black Jews were converts to Judaism from Christianity, they understood full well the significance of these Christian holidays and how they were infused on the school system. All right. So he wraps up. Oh, no, I believe that's the end, actually. Let's see. No, it's not. But it goes on to say, I was born into, yes, I was born into the law and I grew up to practice of the Old Testament, observing the law. I would go to the temple and observe Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, Yom Kippur, Passover, all the high holy days. I grew up going to temples, a part of my life. It's my faith. It's something I maintain and carry with me as a major part of who I am. But I do not call myself Jewish for two reasons. First, biblically, I was taught that white people were from the line of Esau and people of color were from the line of Jacob. All right. And we know where got that teaching from. But it goes on to say, people at the temple refer to themselves and each other as Hebrew Israelites. There's a lot of Hebrew Israelites within Chicago who make more of a political interpretation of the Bible. They offer classes, they talk about Black Americans especially, but I go to the temple to worship. The term Jew I associate with white people. I have some conflicting emotions about that. If I say I'm not Jewish because Jewish people are white, it's as if I'm accepting that all Jewish people are white. Yes, not all Jewish people are white. I do not know that. Excuse me, I do know that. But at the same time, the term Black Jews doesn't work for me either because it seems to assert that Jewish people are normally white. You have these terms, these labels that other people give you that don't quite work for you. And so you establish your own terms, and those terms are sometimes in reaction to terms that already exist. My mother was a Hebrew Israelite. She is actually fluent in Hebrew. My father converted when he married my mother. My grandmother was, or my grandmother on my mother's side was a Hebrew Israelite. He came into law in his lifetime and he converted to Judaism. I think at one point he was a Christian. He just wanted some kind of meaning with his faith and he wasn't getting that. So he decided to search for the faith that he spoke to him. He did research and studied the Bible and how it related to the African descendants, all right? And that was coming from his grandfather. My grandfather was dating my grandmother when he became into the law, and then she converted with him. Once they got married, they practiced and they taught their children. So their children were born and raised in law, as was I. I don't know. I don't know if that was an issue for their families. I need to talk to one of my grandmothers about this. I remember one conversation about how sister-in-law frowned upon her because she didn't come to family gatherings around Christmas. My grandparents honored. Excuse me. My grandparents honored conflicting holy days, but it wasn't like my grandmother's family disowned her. They just said, "Oh, that's what you want to do? Okay, you're still our child." In my school community, I didn't see many people of color who practiced Judaism, but I found a community of Hebrew Israelites when I went to the temple. I see there very actual other people who aged and of color who practice Judaism. On high holy days, our temple had about 5,100 people. From the Sabbath, for the Sabbath, more usual would be 25 to 30. Growing, excuse me, he goes on to say, white Jews are usually surprised when I say I practice Judaism. It's like, what you do? Why are they so shocked or so resistant to that thought? It goes on to say, in the temple, we would say that the Jewish people are our cousins, Esau and Jacob again. But even in college, I just didn't see any connection. One day I decided to venture out with a friend who was also of color and a Hebrew Israelite. We went to a temple at my university, and there were a lot of white Jews. We felt very isolated and unwelcome. I would say we left within 20 minutes. All right. So they felt very isolated and unwelcome, and they left within 20 minutes. That's partly why the number of Jews of color are so underestimated. They are not welcome, so they're not in a Jewish institute to get counted. All right. And that could be very well true. Why they number the Jews of color within America so low. Well, we know it's um, well over a million. But it goes on to say, it is not like I'm hostile towards white Jews. I do not want to think that. The white Jewish people I speak to who know about other Jewish people of color are usually very open-minded, open to telling me, for example, where I can buy mezuzah. My advisors, who happen to be Jewish, I told her I'm practicing Judaism and I needed to get a mezuzah, and she told me where to go. But when I went to the synagogue to buy the mezuzah, the people there looked so skeptical. They weren't cold. They just looked at me like they were mystified, like I didn't belong there. I asked if this was a synagogue where I could purchase a mezuzah, and they asked if I was lost. Like at Passover, when I eat my mezuzah or my matzah, I'm so visible. So I'm constantly dealing with assumptions. My sister and I are working on strengthening our faith, but we also need to problematize the terminology we use and the representation of Jews. You don't see people of the color on the matzah boxes, and that's true. You know what I'm saying? When you go to Kroger, when you go to Publix, you don't pick up that matzah box and you know what I'm saying, see people of color. You know what I'm saying? You know who you see on there. You see the Ashkenazim on there. That's who you see on there. So we don't see people of color within the kosher food aisles, man. That's a fact. It goes on to say, if we could diversify the production of images and work on redefining our simplistic notion of what it means to be Jewish, then I think we'd be working towards something more accurate. And I agree. I would like people to understand that the Hebrew Israelite culture is complex. Once we recognize Judaism as multicultural, we could start building alliances. There is so much potential in understanding the multiculture that surrounds Judaism. And if Jews of color and white Jews were working together to fight racism, this could change the way racism was fought. And possibly it could. And that was coming from Nirvana. All right. And continuing on, this coming from Rebecca Walker. Let's see what she has to say. She states that late one night during my first year at Yale, a WASP looking Jewish student scrolled into my room through the fire exit door. He is drunk and twirling a Swiss Army knife between his nimble tennis champion fingers. All right, so he is drunk and twirling a Swiss Army knife between his nimble tennis champion fingers, and he says, "Are you really black and Jewish?" he asks, slurring his words, pitching forward in an angry, raging armchair my roommate has covered with an equally wrapped white sheet. How can that be possible? Maybe it is his drunkenness, or perhaps he is actually trying to see me. But this boy squints at me, then peering at me, or peering at my nose, my eyes, and my hair. I stare back at him for a few moments, eyes flashing with rage, and then take the red knife from his tainted and tapered fingers. And as he clutches at the air above him, I hold it back and tell him in a voice I want him to be sure is black that I think he'd better go. All right, so you already know what the sister said. But she goes on to say, but after he leaves through the still unlocked exit door, I sit for quiet I sit for quite a while in the dark, and she says, "Am I possible?" All right. And yes, sister, you definitely are possible. So again, I was just, showing references of Jews of color and pointing out the racism within the Jewish community towards Jews of color. And even things like this happen. Like she said she had a knife pulled on her by a white Jew, you know what I'm saying? And he asked if she's really black and Jewish, you know what I'm saying? And how can that be possible? And it even got her thinking and questioning, is she possible? You know what I'm saying? And again, that's coming from Rebecca Walker. Now let's continue on. I told you all we have a lot to go through. Take a break real quick, look at the chat before I continue on. And again, you have any questions, please put them in. I will catch up to them. And again, the brother says, "Shalom, brother, since the Lord have revealed to me in a dream about this truth, I am very curious to learn. May the Lord help you to awaken his true seed." Indeed, brother, indeed. I have a lot of videos that you can go back and watch dealing with. I'm pretty sure you are Bantu brother, with you being in Namibia. So I have a lot of videos dealing with the Bantus and stuff like that. So you definitely can go back and watch that. you know what I'm saying, for context, dealing with, you know, how they migrate into Africa, traditions, customs, or traditions, things like that. But again, shalom, shalom to you. So let's continue on. It says, but the story of African American Jews did not begin yesterday or even in the 1960s. In 1896, in Lawrence, Kansas, William S. Crowdy founded the Church of God of Saints Christ, preaching a heterodox version of Judaism based upon the assertion that Black people were descendants from the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And that's what you will notice. If you go and look at all these early, I guess you can say, how can I put this? If you go and look at all these early founders within the Black Jewish community, like the early founders of the camps and the early founders of the Black synagogues and the early founders of the Black Jewish churches, they all said in particular that Black Americans, that the Negroes, that we were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They didn't say Judah. They didn't say nothing about no Native American, no Mexican being descendants from the 10 lost tribes of Israel. No, they said we were descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. And then you start to get a switch from where we go from the 10 lost tribes of Israel to where we're just being descendants of Judah. I just wanted to point that out. But it goes on to say, by 1919 through 1931, there are records of at least 8 Black Jewish cults that originated in Harlem. The literature provides vigorous and inconclusive debate about the numbers and about what those numbers represent. It says some congregations identify only as Jewish, some mix with Christian elements, some connected with white Jewish congregations, and some say Black Jews are the only true Jews. Some carefully keep kosher, observing Shabbat and all Jewish holidays. The Israelite Board of Rabbis identifies 6-member congregations, but additionally, Black Jewish congregations worship all over the United States and Africa, North Africa, Ethiopia, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. All have Jewish communities, some ancient, some newer, but with ancient heritage, all right? In 2006, Nigeria alone had at least 30 congregations. And we know those congregations in Nigeria would be attributed to your Igbos, as well as your Yoruba tribes, as well as your Ibibios and Efik. It goes on to say, in addition to observant Jews who are Black, in addition to observant Jews who are Black and Blacks who observe Judaism, there are those who simply have a Jewish mother, which makes them halakhically, by Jewish law, Jewish, or a Jewish father. And we know, according to the scripture, you are what your father is. You're not a Jew based off your mother. You're an Israelite based off your father. We know that. But it says which may make them Jewish by family, practice, or culture. Jewish and African Americans have carried heavy symbolic weight for each other, not just the recent past, but back many decades. As early as the 1900s, Negro preachers were traveling through the Carolinas preaching the doctrine that the so-called Negroes were really the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All right, this 40 years after slavery. Where did they get this knowledge from? Their ancestors that was enslaved. It says there is no reason to think, however, that such reflections did not begin much earlier during slavery itself. Like I just said, in the 1800s, a well-planned insurrection of slaves under the leadership of a slave named Gabriel was discovered near Richmond, Virginia. Franklin Frazier account of these events notes that Gabriel made use of the Bible to impress upon the Negroes that they, as the Israelites, could throw off the yoke of slavery, and that God would come to their aid, all right? And we see that actually came to fulfillment. It goes on to say, everywhere one looks, in the language of the bondsmen and the men, and of the free Africans, Exodus looms the story of the Jews, God's chosen people, and the emancipation that would come in the promised land, the North more often than Africa. Moses as Harriet Tubman. It says, The queer nationalist Marcus Garvey was often referred to as Black Moses. Self-identified Black Jew Arnold Ford tried without success to persuade Garvey to adopt Judaism as the religion of African Americans. And I actually might do a video on this, dealing with the presence of the Black Jews within the UNICA, dealing with Marcus Garvey and how, basically his whole movement was influenced by Rabbi Ford and other Jews within, the UNIA. You know what I'm saying? But like they said, Marcus Garvey and Rabbi Arnold Joshua Ford actually did have a fallout. You know what I'm saying? Because Marcus Garvey did not want to accept Judaism as the national religion of the African American. Basically, Marcus Garvey basically wanted to cater to everybody. Basically, he didn't basically want to single out any other peoples of any other religion. So that's why essentially he did not choose Judaism as the national religion of the Black man in the Americas. But it goes on to say it is not known whether Lucy Marks, a member of the congregation of McCabe Israel in Philadelphia, was the descendant of one of the Black Jews who came up to the islands, or was a former slave of Rachel Marks. She was a devoted observer of the precepts of Judaism. In the prominent Marks family, in whose household Lucy lived, she was an accepted member. Upon her death, the Marks family applied for a customary permit for burial in the historical colonial Spruce Street Cemetery. This was in accordance with the congregational practice, which entitled Lucy to a place in the burying yard, providing that her induction into Judaism met with rabbinical dicta. Horrified that a Black woman would lie internally in the consecrated ground among the old Jewish aristocracy, a number of members protested, but the Marks family and their supporters were successful in providing a Jewish burial for Lucy. All right, so we even have another example of Black Jewish woman within America, specifically Philadelphia, and she was buried within this Jewish cemetery within Spruce Street, or on Spruce Street specifically. So continuing on, it says what's complicated is there are certain myths that dominate the way we study migratory populations. One such myth is that people migrate and their descendants remain exactly the same, and that's not true. The people we say in Northern Europe who called themselves Jews, their ancestors did not look the way they look. Similarly, what's interesting is we're seeing a living example of this today. In my research, I've came across so many Jewish communities, not only Ashkenazic and Sephardic. I've came across the Obadiah of Uganda, the Limba Jewish community of Southern Africa, and on and on. I just came back from Brazil, where I began to not only see the presence of Moroccan Ethiopian Jewry or Jewish communities, but I've also also some of the lay rituals. I've seen people on the streets who reflect the West African Jewish community, who may have come over throughout slavery, but no one is asking those questions to do the research, or so the research hasn't developed yet. It says Mizrahim from the Middle East and North Africa, Sephardim from Iberian Peninsula, Ashkenazi from Western and Eastern Europe. Both these forms represent diaspora communities old and descendants live all over the globe. These terms may suggest but cannot predict color or appearance, all right? Because we know we have Black Sephardim Jews. We know we have Black Jews that still live in the Middle East to this day. We know we have Black Jews that live in North Africa. And we know we have Black Jews amongst the Mizrahim community. All right? And I even showed Black Yemenite Jews in the beginning of the presentation. But it says by one estimate, 13.5 million Jews in the world break down into a also estimated 3+ million Mizrahim / Sephardim and 10+ million Ashkenazim. But where are we counting the Hebrew Israelites? That's interesting. Where are you counting us? Where it also says, where are you counting the conversos who fled to the New World? All right, and a lot of those conversos can be seen within the African American community, as well as the Afro-Brazilian and Afro-Jamaican communities. It says the Jews in Nigeria, Uganda, India, Iran, Turkey, Jews of color in the United States, invisible, unwelcome, thus undercounted because unwelcome. All right. So let's continue. The African story parallels, the African story parallels that of other groups of Jews throughout the diaspora. All right. So again, the African story parallels that of other groups of Jews throughout the diaspora. There are long-standing communities with greater or lesser degrees of continuous practice depending on how safe they were. There are those who have Jewish heritage and now practice other religions, even through assimilation or through forced conversion. Some may live as Christians or Muslims, yet are proud of their Jewish ancestry. And we can see that reflected within African Americans today. A lot of us were converted to Judaism, a lot of our ancestors were converted to Judaism. I'm sorry, family. A lot of our ancestors were converted to Christianity. And we see that Christianity religion is passed down to us all the way up to this day, to where African Americans are still Christians, and some of them don't even know about their, Israelite heritage or ancestry. But it says there are also those who discovered Judaism and decided to convert. Whether ancient or new, a distinctive trait of African communities resulted from historical isolation from rabbinical Judaism. And why would they be isolated from rabbinical Judaism? That's because these are descendants of, the northern tribes of Israel. These are descendants of those who came from Assyria, came from Babylon. These are those Jews in Western Africa and Central Africa who came before 70 AD, things of that sort, before, the Talmud and stuff came along. It says their Judaism has either been passed on through oral tradition or it's practiced as pre-Talmudic Torah-based Judaism. All right. This is why Eldad the Danite said they knew not Talmud nor Mishnah. All right. Jews of Africa include those from North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria, but also from East, West, and Southern Africa, the Beta Israel, Ethiopia, and the Limba of Southern Africa. It says communities who claim or embrace Jewish roots in the 20th century, including the Obudaya of Uganda, the Ruskap in Zimbabwe, and the Sefwi in Ghana. All right. So let's continue on. Just bringing out, the history of Black Jews, the history of Jews of color. And the next source we're going to read from before we get ready to wrap this up is coming from Out of Left Field. All right. Again, Out of Left Field is what we'll be reading from next. And we're going to start. Let's start at the very top. All right. 1 second. So it says, the one other Jewish entrepreneur in Black baseball was not subject to the problems that white Jews experienced in the world of Black baseball because he was also African American. Of all the Jewish owners of Black baseball teams, the ones whose story challenged assumptions of white Jewish racial identity is Howard Zebulon Plummer. Plummer was the owner of the Bellevue Grays and also the leader of a group of Hebrew Israelites. All right, the Church of God and Saints, also known as Temple Beth El. The team, originally called the Saints, started by Plummer's father in the early 1920s for the purpose of communal recreation. All right, so yes, we had Black Jewish baseball teams, and this is one of them. Black Jewish baseball team, the Bellevue Grays. It says H.Z. Plummer, generally referred to as Bishop Plummer in the Black press and as grandfather Abraham in his own community, was the religious leader of the Temple Beth El from 1931 to 1975, and he professionalized the team. Although not an official part of the Negro Major Leagues. Under Plummer's leadership, the Bellevue Grays were part of the two lesser-known leagues, the Negro International/Colored Eastern League in 1939 and the Interstate League in 1940. They also played independently against local and Negro National and American League teams from 1920s through the 1950s, all right? It says, like other Black Jewish Hebrew Israelite groups, Temple Beth El, self-identified as Jewish, was questioned by Jews of European descent. The question itself implies an assumption that the rabbinical Judaism practiced by Ashkenazi Jews is normative, and all other versions of Judaism must be scrutinized for the similarities and differences to that standard before they can be accepted as Jewish. And we just read in the previous source that the African Jewish communities and the African Americans practice pre-Talmudic Judaism. All right. But it goes on to say, Black Jews have often been invisible to the outside world, as Jewish and white identities have been understood as intertwined. So again, Jewish and white identities have been understood to have been intertwined. So they are one. White Jews, anxious to assimilate, shunned contact with Black Jews, often claiming that Hebrew Israelite religion was a version of Christianity and not Judaism, as they claim. The question that Walter Isaac pointedly asked, why a group of Christians would refute to accept any religious affiliation with Christianity, and both pertinent and unanswered by those who choose to exclude this group from the mythical worldwide Jewish community. Including H.Z. Plummer and the Bellevue Grays, is the story of Jewish and Black baseball restores them to the rightful place in the history of American Jews in the 20th century. It is not surprising that little is known about African American Jews, whose traditions arose out of the period of enslavement. So we keep saying that our period arose once we were free from enslavement, all right? So again, we got these ideas from our ancestors. We got these practices from our ancestors. What was the video I brought this out? I believe it was European Jews and European Jewry and West African Jewry. In the West African Jewry video, I brought out the source letting us know that the traditional religion of the American Negro was Judaism. It literally told us that in slavery, our ancestors were practicing Judaism, all right? So this is why we see this, period, or this mass awakening of, people claiming to be Israelites and stuff coming out of the period of enslavement. Again, it says it is not surprising that little is known about African American Jews whose traditions arose out of the period of enslavement. As a survival technique, Blacks concealed much from white society during enslavement, and emancipation did little to nothing to alter that, all right? So that's what was going on. Goes on to say, what we do know of slave religion is that what we do know of slave religion in the American South was that it successfully incorporated elements of African traditions, including Jewish, Christian, Muslims, and indigenous customs, and mixed them with versions of Protestant Christianity that was taught by slave masters. So we can see a clear distinction here from the practices brought over from Africa. The practices brought over from Africa were the so-called African traditions, which they put in quotations, the Jewish traditions, the Christian traditions, the Muslim traditions, and even indigenous customs. They also mixed these traditions with the Protestant Christianity that was taught to them by the slave masters, all right? This new religious system was based mostly on Hebrew Bible references to the liberation from slavery and the images of the chosen people. Next, we have the Bellevue Grays, next we're going to continue to read, and it says that the Bellevue Grays were an independent Black Jewish baseball team that was part of the community in the 1920s through 1930s. It says, like Eastern European immigrant Jews who learned about baseball in order to become American, Black Jews also saw baseball as way of belonging to America. But for them, belonging meant being welcome only in the segregated world that Black baseball embodied. It says the Grays achieved short-lived success, but the team was unsustainable in an industry built on cutthroat business dealings. There were anathema to their religious values. As Jews were in the process of becoming white during this era, during what era? During the 1920s and 1930s, Jews were in the process of becoming white. We know that well up before this point, that these people were known to be Black. Before the Eastern European immigrants started coming into America, the Jews were known to be Black. And even the early Jews within America was Black. I might bring that source out later on. The first Jew on record in America was Black, or a Jew of color. But again, as Jews were in the process of becoming white during this era, a Black Jewish baseball team posed a threat to Jews who sought to assimilate through whiteness, all right? White Jews were also prone to reject the Jewishness of Black Jews because their religious practices were different and therefore suspect. Black Jews themselves, particularly those from a Hebrew Israelite background, were only minimally connected to the white Jewish world. All right, and if anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We're about to get ready and wrap it up with a few illustrations and pictures. All right, and this picture right here is coming from the Plumber Boys. All right, again, the Bellevue Grays, Black Jewish baseball team, Jews of color. Here we go again. Full picture of the team. Picture dated 1924. Again, Bellevue Grays, 1920. One of the only Black Jewish baseball teams. Let's continue with the pictures. This picture right here is a Black Jewish cantor. She is a woman. All right. Paul Fields presents the only colored woman cantor in the world, Mrs. Goldie. All right. She will sing in the 6 different languages with an all-star cast, and Miss Rosetta Yager. All right. And again, this is Mrs. Goldie. She was a Yiddish cantor or Yiddish singer. All right. And she was a Jew of color. Another Jew of color we have, Thomas LaRue. All right. He was a famous cantor as well, a Jewish cantor or a Jewish musician as well, Thomas LaRue. We also have Willie the Lion Smith, all right, the Hebrew cantor up in New York. So we see we have a lot of history, you know what I'm saying, that we can dig into, that we just, when it's not taught of. And we can literally go into individual videos on these pictures that I just showed you all. We can do an entire video on Willie the Lion Smith. We can do an entire video on Mrs. Goldie. Same for Thomas LaRue. Dealing with the history regarding these folk. Negro Judaism to the left, Rabbi Hailing Hank. All right. Rabbi Hailing Hank. Brother right here, Abin La Bogola. This is the brother from the Imo Yoquam tribe that settled amongst the Yorubas. All right. The Jews that settled amongst the Yorubas at a later date. We have a Negro Jew right here to the left, snapped in a street proceeding of a Jew in New York. All right. And we can see this Jew in New York is a Jew of color. That's obvious. All right. And this famous picture that we've always seen, but we've never got the backdrop. We've never got the background knowledge on the picture. All right, so the Moorish Zionist Temple in New York. All right, the Moorish Zionist Temple of the Moorish Jews. These people claim an ancestry from 3 Jewish tribes driven into Africa by civil wars among the ancient Hebrews. Excuse me. In the front line is Rabbi Israel ben Newman with his left hand upraised right here. All right. On his left is Mordecai Herman, president of the congregation. And on his left would be right here. It says behind Herman in the center with the yarmulke like a Turkish fez is Rabbi Gorin from Algeria. All right, so we even had connections with Jews, black Jews from Algeria, right? We had connections with black Jews from Algeria, all the way in New York. This is in the streets of Harlem. And the brother with the Turkish like fez on would be this brother right here. All right, right behind him. And that would be the brother from Algeria, the black Jew from the black rabbi from Algeria. And it goes on to say at the back, the man with the felt hat is Joseph Trench, one of the black Jews of India. All right. And the man in the back with the felt hat is right here, the black Jew from India. So we can see composed within this very picture at the Moorish Zionist Temple of the Moorish Jews within the streets of Harlem in the 1900s, early 1900s, I believe 1920s, 1930s. We can see a hodgepodge of West African jewelry, Algerian jewelry, and Indian jewelry, or Cochin Indian jewelry. All right. And we can see that they are Jews of color. And with that, family, I wrap it up with Black Israelite history in the New World, or Jews of color in the New World. All right. Y'all willing, you all enjoyed it. And let's see if anybody has any comments, any questions. I'm going to sit right here for a bit, see if anybody has any comments, any questions. Please, 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 if you have anything to say, go ahead and drop it. If not, we're going to get out of here, man. And y'all willing, I will be back this weekend, this Shabbat, to drop some more knowledge for you all. See a lot of you all watching in. Anybody got anything to say, any comments? Let's see. Let's see if I can find that source I was talking about earlier about one of the first Jews in the United States being a Jew of color. Before I continue, or before we wrap up, rather. Shalom, shalom, brother. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, my brother. Shalom, shalom. Let's see. All right, so here we go. Just share this real quick, and if there's not any comments or anything, any questions, anything, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Well, I'm going to share my screen real quick and share this. And this source is coming from a really good book. If you can get your hands on this book, I advise you to get it, all right? But it says right here, let me just make it big real quick for you all. It says there's a unique tale of one Jew, or one black Jew, only a few years earlier. It says in the course of time, an occasional Jew did settle within Boston and was apparently unmolested. One such resident named Solomon had the bad judgment to travel towards New Hampshire on a Sunday in 1668. All right, this is 1668. He says, it goes on to say, this was no means of offense in a day when men were sentenced to a month in jail if they missed church on Sunday. Solomon's journey did not pass unnoticed, and he was brought before the court in Ipswich. The outcome of the case may never be known, but one phrase in a brief court record challenges the intention of the passing reader. Solomon is described as a mulatto Jew, all right, or a mulatto Jew, all right, and we know, according to Jonathan Scorch book, that what many Jews were of the fourth degree, or of the fourth degree, or many Jews were mulattoes. That is to, many Jews were mulattoes. That is very light-skinned blacks. All right, and he goes on to say, as far as we know, the first Jew living in New England was of Negro descent, and that is Solomon, arrested for traveling on a Sunday, a light-skinned black Jew of Negro descent. All right. So again, give you about a few more minutes just to see if there's any questions. All right. If not, like I said, y'all willing, I'll see you all this Shabbat to drop some more knowledge. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all bless. Y'all bless. Thank you again for the support, and thank you for tuning in, family. Thank you again for tuning in. All right. So I see no more questions, no more comments. Just make sure you like the video. Thumbs up on your way out. Make sure to share it with your family, your friends. And as always, enjoy your day, and y'all bless.